November meeting of the Elections Committee, please come to order. We have a quorum. Everybody's here. Approval of minutes of the October 26th meeting, please. You're getting on me, and then you go right ahead.
Motion to accept.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. We have a resignation from our committee. Dick Rhoades has decided to actually run for the board, so he is resigning from this committee. So can I have a motion to accept his resignation?
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Which leaves the appointment of co-chairman open. Anybody interested?
Marshall, I would be interested.
Okay, thank you. Anybody have anything that they want to say that they'll accept his acceptance?
I think Al's too tall.
Well, I've got a couple things, but we'll leave it alone. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Candidate distribution, we have 10, I believe, people who have picked up packets. And like I say, those people are on that copy that you have, and please turn that back in to us because there's lots of personal information on that we probably don't want to hide, don't want anybody to get access to. So
Marshall, are you talking about this written list of people that may be candidates?
I think we had 11, and then one person brought it back.
One's
so we
off,
have 10.
and then there's somebody added with no information.
Right, that was just the most recent. Go ahead.
I have a complete list that actually is typed out, but Marshall thought that he would just distribute that to give you all an idea of who all the contenders are.
I'll have a list that you can look at afterwards. It might be a little more readable. Yeah. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the election rules for candidates, and if you find that in your packet, your election rules for candidates. I just thought we would just kind of review quickly that situation. One of the things that has come to our attention, and we don't know for sure, but we have to remember that people shouldn't get signatures under a roof. In other words, this area here, that has no roof out there, but it's still under, I call it under roof. So they shouldn't sit out there and get signatures. It has to be away from the building.
I think there's a distance requirement, 50 feet or something like that.
No, that would be for one of the county or federal or state elections. Now, if a candidate on election day is campaigning, they will have to stay 75 feet away. However, for obtaining petition signatures, they can do so at the entryway. So where the iron fencing is around Coons, they would have to stand on the street side, the outside side.
Did you get any questions from candidates, Karen, when they picked up their packets relating to this?
Yes. Unfortunately, I was out for a number of the pickups that came in, but I'll be talking to everybody to be sure that everyone is following the rules. Right now, my understanding is that a number of candidates have fulfilled the petition requirements, but they have not turned them in to me. But we generally do hear if people see problems. So we've had a few complaints, and that's been sorted out.
Okay. So I understand that Katie, you do the verification. Could you kind of talk to us about, I brought my 250 signatures. No? That's not it.
No. The signature, okay, so I see what you're talking about. Petition signature verifications. When a candidate brings their packet of petitions in to me, those owner member numbers are typed out and double checked on a huge Excel spreadsheet. That spreadsheet is then compared to the master database by our accounting department.
Oh,
So
okay.
everything is done electronically. There's no real human error, certainly on the accounting side, because that's done via various lookup programs. But we have our Excel spreadsheet of owner member numbers checked. So for example, I generally end up with well over 230, even 280 signatures. That's why I always ask for a minimum of 220, so we know for sure our candidates obtain 200 verified signatures. I do the verification with staff.
Okay. And I guess what I was talking about was election, where do it by computer from home. The election is done by computer, and that's verified by what, Katie?
What do you mean the election is verified?
Well, your vote is verified.
Digital voting.
Okay, so let me just walk you through the process from kind of the beginning is,
Okay, please, yeah.
we go
Point of
through,
order.
sure.
I believe that's gonna be covered in section 3.06.
Oh, yeah, I
Um,
see that.
Well, that was what Karen just covered. Explanation of signature verification is what Karen just covered.
Yeah. We can go to 6.
But have we finished the election rules? 304?
If there was no questions when I asked her if anybody had any questions, and you said not necessarily, right?
I got very few questions from candidates, but I will be checking in with them most likely the first week in December.
Okay.
I do have one question. We were talking about undercover. So within the pool area, since that's a fenced-in area, that would be considered undercover, correct?
Yeah, an imaginary roof, if you
Yeah.
will. Beardsley Park, an imaginary roof. The softball field, an imaginary roof.
Oh, the park itself.
That is correct. I cannot go in if I were running for governing board director. I couldn't bring my petition into people sitting in the stands or obviously playing softball.
Or like at the
So you
concerts
have to
and
stay
such.
outside. Everybody can go to these events to collect petition signatures as long as they remain outside the gated area, which then becomes sort of an imaginary roof line. Does that
And
make
after-
sense?
And after the event.
And after the event, if they'd like, but it's usually more productive before. People are kind of racing to get home after most events.
Okay. Okay, Katie, I put 305 video plans. You want to kind of brief us on that?
Sure. Martin and I met with the photography club, and they were very gracious. They have some excellent facilities, including a sort of private video studio with really nice lighting and backdrops and stands and whatnot. So we will set up time with them on those 2 dates, December 12th and 13th. So once the candidates are identified, we can go in there and set up time to do their little spiels. Was that the December 12th and 13th, Karen?
I believe
Yeah, I think that
it's
was January.
January 12 and
Okay.
13 because we want to go through candidate training with them and talk about the procedure.
Oh,
That's
so
on January
12th,
6th.
13th.
So it should be January 12 and 13, not December.
Okay.
Yeah, so we won't have the deadline cutoff for petitions is until January. So after that, once we know who the candidates are, we'll set up times for them to come in and do their little video vignettes, 2 to 3 minutes of why people should vote for them, working with photography club on that and get those all set up. And then they'll be on our YouTube channel with links through our social media. And then when we have the actual ballot set up, we can have a hyperlink on the ballot so people can click on that and hear from the candidates themselves.
And we're talking like 1 or 2 minutes?
Maybe 2 to 3 on something like
Okay.
that, not more than 3.
Okay. All right, my mistake on that date, Leslie, you can write that down. You hear me? Okay, let's talk about the verification of voting, of voters, counting votes and so on. So, a percentage of votes from online voting is about 70, is that right? 70% of the people vote by online?
It's probably higher than that. I think in the recall, we had maybe 7,500 people voted and maybe 200 to 300 came in person. So it's a huge percent of the vote online.
Okay. All right, and you can verify that vote by their number, their card number, rec card number, right?
Yeah, so it's sort of dual. People will make sure they have an email address on file with us, so you have to have a unique email address, and then you have your rec card number. Spouses cannot share an email address. We're different than other communities that have a per lot assessment, and they have a per lot vote, so one email address per couple, if you will. Here, each person who's a valid owner member can vote, so each person has their own account. Each person has to have their own email address. So we do a super hard push to make sure people have their email addresses on file. Of course, we know their owner member IDs. So we'll go through and do an export from the database of all the owner members who have an email address on file, and then we will verify those email addresses. Some people just gave them to us wrong or they're outdated. Sometimes it's a data error, input error. And then we will send that to our vendor, and the vendor handles sending out those ballots to the voters, so we're hands off at that point. The vendor will send them out when the elections open. He'll send reminder emails to those people who haven't voted before the deadline. I think he does 2 batches of those. Then the balloting closes. Then he sends back to me a list of owner member IDs who have voted already. I can import that into our database to say these owner member numbers have already voted. I don't know how they voted. I just know they voted. So then on election day, when people come into the Data Resource Center, we verify them again, and I can tell, I'm sorry, you've already voted. You can't vote again. Again, I don't know how they voted. We just know they don't get a new ballot. If someone says, sorry, I didn't vote, or I want to vote again and wipe out my own ballot, that's where we would talk to the election chair to say, do you want to quash the original vote? I talk to the vendor. They could wipe out the vote. We can give them a ballot. That almost never happens, but it is a possibility. And then we give them a code to vote in the DRC that day if they haven't voted yet. And that same verification process happens again in our membership database. Are they an owner member? Are they in good standing? Have they voted yet? If not, they get the code. We mark them as voted. They go through the voting process and they walk out the door. Okay. So a couple important things to remember. It's only owner members who can vote. Associates may not vote. Tenants may not vote. They also may not fill out the signature pages Karen was talking about. That's why people kind of get thrown out on those. We do have them try every year. They just don't know that they're not allowed to vote or not allowed to sign the petitions. And we do have some people that will expire before the vote or will be expired and will come in to pay, and we do have a mechanism to handle that. If they voted and they go expired, I have a mechanism to do that, and I will give it to the election chair, so you can have them come in and pay, and we'll keep their vote, or if they don't pay, we quash their vote. That's very rare, but it does happen.
Okay. Now, let's go on the day of the voting. Can we, are we able to, someone might want to change their vote an hour after they voted? Do we have the mechanism to pull that?
On election day, no. So if they voted online, the vendor has the ability to tie it to their owner member card and their email address and wipe out that individual vote. Previous election committees have wanted the election day voting to be completely anonymous. And by that, I mean, we know you voted, but we can't tie it down to your specific vote and like tear up the ballot. So once you vote in person, you're done. There's no coming back and wiping out your ballot. It is very purely anonymous at that point. They all use the same generic code that day, and so it's that code that can't be wiped out.
Okay, is there a way to do that just like you do the online voting? Is there a way to tie their vote to a number?
Yes, so we could have 28,000 unique codes. Right now, because of something that previous election committees wanted, they wanted it to be purely anonymous. I don't know why, but they did. So all the ones that voted in early had a unique code tied to their number. When they come into the DRC, it was like 5 different codes that we reused for election day voting. If you want, every single person will get a unique code on election day. And if they got back in line 10 minutes later and said, I want you to wipe out my code, we could look it up, the vendor could look it up, wipe it out, and have them vote again. It's going to slow down the process, and it's going to be a lot more paperwork of looking up these codes. These are 12 or 13 digit unique codes that volunteers like yourselves are going to have to type into the computer system. That gets real messy.
Marshall, I have a question. Why are you concerned about somebody changing their mind 10 minutes later or a half hour, or an hour later?
Well, we had that situation during the recall. One.
If it was one, that's a one-off. I would suggest that person, you know, when you're voting, vote right. I don't think there should be an option for somebody saying, oops, I got influenced after I left here, and let me go change my vote because I didn't know this. I think they need to have their information studied. I think they need to have their decision made and not get influenced after a vote by people who may or may not be at the polls. I also think we should possibly expect more in-person voting this time because we had a lot of remote people, a lot of snowbirds on the recall. So that percentage may be a little higher of in-person. And I do not want to clog up that system that day. I think we'd have more frustrated people who were waiting and waiting. And we don't need to design a voting system for one person's mistake.
Okay.
You're also going to introduce human error. If you guys are the ones working the polls that day and you're typing in 12-digit, 13-digit weird codes, you might type in the wrong one, which means you might assign someone's code to someone else. The alternative is I have to make 28,000 barcodes that are scannable that day, which means you're shuffling through all this paper to find the right code to give to the person. Alternatively, you mail these codes to all the owner members, and they're going to lose them. They're going to be out of town. They're going to get bounce back mail, and trust me, that's a mess.
I have a question. On in-person voting day, I noticed when I voted that I never had to put an owner member number in on the actual voting page that comes up on the computer. Why wouldn't it be tied to an owner member number instead of all these codes and everything else? If I at least had to enter my owner member number, we have the same ability to link votes and member numbers as we would digitally. So I'm not understanding why we're taking two different approaches, one for digital, one for in-person voting. And that's where the confusion's coming in.
Because we have 7,000 golfers who share their owner member numbers on bulletin boards and in rosters freely. And if that was the case, there would be so much voter fraud. It's ridiculous. So the email addresses and the unique codes that are emailed to those people is really the only way to keep it anonymous. So I don't share my email password with people,
Right.
but people regularly share their member IDs with people in Sun City West.
Okay. The confusion, though, is on these two different procedures. You have one digitally, and then everything's anonymous in person. But digitally, people can still be linked back to their votes, and that's where the confusion's coming in. Why is it a different procedure on in-person voting day?
Right. I think I explained that because of that request for anonymity. And if we created those anonymous codes, we could. It's 28,000 codes. You have to get a way to give those 28,000 codes to the owner members.
And who requested anonymity? That's the part that I'm struggling with. Who did that?
A previous
Committee?
election committee. So again, though, I can email this unique code to people at home on their email address. But the vast majority of people that we don't have email addresses for, how do I get that code to them? The only other way to do it is when they walk through the door. Now I got to look them up, find a way to get that code to them, find a way to enter that code into the computer in the DRC, and you have maybe 200 people you're going to do that to, and you've got stacks of paper with those codes on them. The room for error there is huge. The problem with the voter you're talking about is that the vendor has something turned on. So when you do vote, you can say, I want a request of how I voted emailed to me. He had that turned on, and we didn't have this situation before. So somebody that voted in person and happened to have an email address, but voted in person, said, I want my results sent to me, and it sent him just some random results, which wasn't the way he voted. What the vendor's already told me he's going to do this next year is turn that off. So if you vote in early, you'll have those emails results sent to you, and it is unique, and that code's tied to you, and it will go to you. On election day, as soon as the early voting is closed, he turns that off. So if you vote in person, you can't have those results emailed to you because they're anonymous and they're not tied to you. There is no unique code tied to you once you walk through that door. So that solves that problem.
But wouldn't people want to know how they voted?
Then they can get an email address, or we can print out 28,000 codes, and we can do that, absolutely. But you guys are going to be responsible for getting those codes printed out and handing them to the people, looking them up, making sure the correct codes goes to the right voter who walks through that door. And they still don't have an email address, so I don't know how you're going to send them the results of their vote.
So you're telling me that someone goes in to vote in person, and then they come to you and they want you to send how they voted to you? You're saying if they ask to get their results, how they voted?
They don't. We had one guy last year that did this. It's not been a problem for 5 years. Last year, one guy did it. So you're reinventing the wheel for one guy that had an issue, and in the end, he really was fine. I ended up talking to him. He was fine, and everything worked out the way he wanted. But if he's got an email address, he should be voting from home and getting those results sent to him. But if the people that come into the DRC, 99% of them don't have email addresses, so I don't know how you're going to email the results of how they voted to them in the first place. So, I mean,
I don't understand why we're sending them results.
we're not.
People want to know that because of all the election fraud issues, people want to know that when they did their in-person voting, they want the results of how they voted sent to their email address if they have an email address. And this particular man and his wife claimed that they received emails that represented the opposite of how they voted.
The wife voted at home using her email, and she got the correct results. The gentleman came in, voted anonymously using that generic code, and the vendor had not turned off that get your results. So he did get mixed up results because we should have turned that thing off, because in-person voting is anonymous and it's not he didn't use a unique code. So it was meaningless what was sent to him. So I don't know how you're going to print out election day results to people unless we're going to hook up printers to every single computer. Anything's possible. We can do all this, but it seems like we're making a mountain out of a molehill for one person. This last election was weird because of the federal election, and people were a little bit paranoid. We had people asking if we were using Dominion voting machines. We were asking what we were doing to prevent fraud. There was a high level of paranoia for those people that came into the DRC. And I'm not making light of it. It was trickling down to this local election where we were not using Dominion machines, of course. We didn't have the county involved. We were using our regular DRC computers. But that's the level that caused this situation to rise up today. We've done online voting since 2017, never had this problem. People that vote from home get their results. People that don't have an email address or a computer, they come into the DRC, they're fine. Nobody has ever requested this printout until this one gentleman. And I have the solution. We're turning that ability to request off after early voting closes.
I
So
think
the
your
problem is
solution
solved.
is very good. I don't think we should design this voting process for an anomaly.
Any other input?
I have a question because it seems like we're kind of crossing over on two separate questions here. We have the question of someone getting results, and then we have, what was the original question that we started with? Oh, someone changing their votes. So it seems like we're dealing with two totally separate issues here, but we've kind of started mixing them up, so I think we should say which one we're gonna discuss first and how we resolve that. And then move on to the second question.
I don't know of anyone wanting to change their results. That's the first
I
I've
mean,
heard of
change
that.
their vote. You were saying that somebody came in and wanted to change their vote?
We had a digital person, Katie, who
Yeah.
wanted to. You were able to work back through the company, wipe it clean, and they revoted. That was on the online voting portion.
Yeah, that's not a problem. We've done that before. So that's it. The in-person people vote and they vote anonymously and they're done. It's always been that way. It's not a problem. The people that vote and get a unique code, I can't. The vendor can go quash it and let them vote again. That has happened a handful of times. It's not a problem. It's never been a problem. So I'm not sure why there's suddenly a big concern and issue over any of this. I'm not sure why this is even coming up as an issue.
Okay, I misunderstood. I thought somebody had voted in person and wanted to change their vote.
We
But
already covered that issue.
Yeah, but I mean, we have to make the decision.
The decision, I think, has already been made, right? We aren't gonna accommodate a change of vote.
I think that's something that we have to vote on.
Okay, I would recommend we don't.
Make the motion. Yeah.
My motion is we don't set up a system that allows somebody to change their vote after they voted.
I second.
And when we say that, are we covering in person and email? We have to say whether it's for both of them.
My motion would be not to allow a change in a vote once you voted. We've got months to prepare to who am I gonna vote for?
agree.
My motion is, don't allow a change in a vote after there's been a vote, period.
And
But
Karen,
via any method.
I don't know, is that something that we would have to change bylaws for, or are we allowed to do it as a committee?
I would think you're allowed to do it as a committee. The committee is responsible for the rules of the special election, meaning the governing board director election, which is the topic of your committee.
You know, in my experience, once you vote, you vote. There's no do-overs. Federally, locally, it's school board, it's done. And I agree with Max. If you haven't prepared yourself, then better luck next time. And I don't mean that lightly, because it's important. And if it's important enough to vote, then do your research.
Yeah, I'm concerned that somebody that comes in and votes, then talks to people that are around the voting booths or voting areas and totally sways that person. And again, we're talking about one person. I think we're wasting our time about talking about one person on any method or any venue. So that's my motion.
You know, we have a judges table on election day for a reason. If any of these anomalies come up, nobody changes anything. We would go to Marshall and ask. And I'll tell you where this has come up in the past is early on when a lot of spouses shared an email address, the couple would get an email address and say the husband would vote it, but it was really the wife's email address. And she would come in and say, I didn't vote. Who voted? I didn't vote. Somebody cast my ballot. And it was the husband. And we would figure that out. And either the couple would say, fine, my husband can cast mine, or vice versa, or whatever. If it was a problem, the judge would say, go ahead and wipe that one out, let them both cast their own. But it was so rare, and it was early on. But those would all come before the judge, and he could decide the merits of whether that would be wiped out. But that really has happened very little since 2017, since we've had such a hard push on getting your email addresses on. This is such an anomaly, you guys. We're spending a lot of time on something that I talked to that gentleman personally, and he understood the issue, and I told him we would turn that request for how did I vote off as soon as early balloting closed, and he understood that. So
I think since the motion has been raised and all the discussion thus far has been in favor of the motion, that we go ahead and call for a vote on the motion.
Okay, now just clarify. You have changed votes on the online voting?
at the request, we bring it to the chair, and the chair would say, yeah, you can wipe that out. usually the person would come to the chair and say, I didn't mean to vote this way, or I can't remember how I voted, can you wipe it out? And it was maybe one, maybe two a year early on. I don't think we had any last year at all. But I would never, ever do that on my own. It was always something I'd bring to Karen, Karen would bring to the chair, and the chair would request it.
But simply now, there'll be no more, according to your motion, there'll be no more changing, even online or in person. Okay? Is there a second to the motion?
I already
Or it
seconded
is?
it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Now, can I get the clarification of the second part of this, which is being able, at request of any voter, to give them the information of how they voted? Because that's where the problem came up after the in-person voting day. So we don't have that ability the way it's set up now, but we have to, in general, then just have the committee agree that we cannot tie votes back to people and will not do so. Follow why this is a different, to Luann's point, this is a different issue.
No, it has to do with this ability on voting day for the people who show up to be able to get information about how they voted. I would make a second motion to say that if you show up in person and you vote, that we have no obligation, no responsibility to tell you what you just voted for or who you voted for. I would make a motion that this anonymous system is a very good system. It keeps it efficient, fast, and again, if you aren't able to write down on a separate piece of paper who I voted for, I think it's irrelevant, and we would be stacking again a process or a change in process very efficient for one, in this example, one person. And I don't think we should design our voting system for one person who has a bad memory.
I
Or-
second.
So may I ask a question again? Is this only on in-person day, or is this the entire election, whether it's digital or in person, where we don't even have the ability? But I'd prefer that we have the same rule across the board regardless of the voting method.
I would suggest we keep what has been done in the past. If there has been an email in the past that's automatic to send people that says this is how you voted in email, I would recommend we keep that. For those people who show up in person, which is a smaller percentage, greatly smaller, I would recommend that we don't create a new process to inform them what they just did in the voting booth.
Katie, just as a point of clarification, when those ballots go out electronically, there is something in there that says if you vote electronically, you get the results back. On the day of, it's all anonymous.
No, this has not been an issue before. Remember, early voting takes place 10 days before the election, and some people have short memories. So it's a nice option. If you have an email, sometimes there's perks that come with that. If you vote on election day, it says, here's who you voted for. Are you sure? This is who you want to vote for. Are you sure? Okay, cast your ballot. You're staring right at those people who you're voting for on election day, hours before the polls close. If that's not enough, I guess I'm not
Yeah.
sure why this is a problem.
I don't want to add any more to the recipe. I think it's a good system.
So if somebody votes via email and comes back to me and says, tell me how I voted, I can do that? Or I tell them, once you vote, whether it's via the online system or in person on voting day, we do not go into the system. We can't in one case, in the other case we could. But what I'm looking for here, folks, is consistency. I don't want it one way for online and a different way. And all I'm saying then is we don't provide the luxury of letting them know how they voted. So the question, Katie, is when I vote online, is there some sort of automatic bounce back that shows how I voted? Or do I have to request that?
I guess I'm concerned how heavily staff is becoming involved in this election. We have a governing board committee and an outside vendor, and it's worked very well. And the more staff is trying to get into how people voted and what we can provide to them is kind of blurring some lines. Staff has always tried to stay very, very outside of this. If we're trying to start providing personal services to individual voters who call our office, I'm not comfortable with that.
What's wrong with, shoot me down here if it's wrong. What's wrong with, when they vote online, that's it? Why do we need to send back a result of how they voted? Why can't we just say, once you vote in person and online, that's it?
It's a service we've offered since 2017. And when you're not sitting in front of a computer on election day, you're throwing it into the ether. It's a little unnerving to not get an email confirmation back. In every other online service, you get an email confirmation back. So it's pretty standard to get that.
But you're
Again-
saying an email confirmation that you voted or an email confirmation of how you voted?
Both. I think you're going to upset a lot of voters if you suddenly turn off this service that's been in place for 5 years.
In general elections, do they send a confirmation of how you voted?
I don't think you vote by email in general elections. You vote by
Well, the
paper
piece, the
ballot.
paper, yeah, you send that back in. But does anyone receive back a confirmation of how they voted?
In any bill or any online anything that I ever do, I get a confirmation with specific details because I've sent it via computer. If I go in person, usually it's less details. But again, you guys can set this up however you want, but you're the committee and I think it's your decision. I don't think staff should be making some of these decisions because there will be a lot of pushback from the public. You're changing something that's worked very well for 5 years.
See, and the way things are right now, it's tension. And the more we change it, the more tension it might be. So I guess I'm thinking that leaving it alone so that people don't get upset might be the right answer.
But then we've also raised the question of, are we gonna leave it alone for digital, but not do it for in-person? I believe that's.
We're not doing it for in-person now, are we?
No. Not a single person has requested a printout in person.
Yeah.
Not a single person.
And see, even if they did, I mean, it would have to be an on-site because a lot of those people don't have emails, is that correct? So you couldn't email them their response
Right.
of how they voted in person, so you would have to print it out to get it
Yeah,
to
I mean,
them?
theoretically, we can print from those 12 computers to the shared printer down there, but that's on you guys. Again, because staff stays out of that. I don't walk up to the computer and watch how people vote. I sit in the back and I verify eligibility. So you guys are going to be printing from those computers, sending it to the shared printer, getting the piece of paper off and walking it up to them. And if you're up for that task, that's not a problem.
My concern would be if you started that for one, in all fairness, you'd have to do it for everyone.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, it seems that if we leave this as it is, we could just withdraw the motion and just leave it as it is. That we continue to confirm it if it's via email and not do anything if it's in person.
I'm happy to withdraw the motion.
I'm happy to suck my second back.
All those in favor? Okay.
There's nothing to vote on because
Yeah, there's no motion.
Oh, but we're not gonna just let you suck, you know what I'm saying?
You don't
Yeah,
have to
yeah,
carry it all.
Yeah, okay. Okay. I've asked for your questions on the forum questions. And what I'll do is, take your questions and I'll make a list of all the questions and then I'll send you copies of that I'm trying to keep this thing off the internet if I can, so, okay? Any questions on that? I'm also suggesting that, I'll wait for committee comments here, okay? Any questions?
I guess I just have one question. We submit our questions, and they may or may not be the questions that appear. Who is gonna call the questions, not just from us, but from the public, so that we have, I guess, a meeting that doesn't last for 30 hours? You know, the questions that do get asked, how has that been done in the past, do you know? When have the candidates up front, we ask them the actual questions. How do we call the questions that may or may not be helpful for the candidates to answer so that the public can decide on those candidates?
I think, if I'm not mistaken, that when they come into the forum, people can give you a question. And then someone can go through our questions compared to that question and make sure that that question's answered. Is that the way it's been
That's
going?
correct. At the forum, people are given cards and pencils by greeters at the lecture hall door. They walk in, they sit down, think about a question or questions. We prefer to have one per card. Then there are people alongside the aisles who collect these questions. As we're preparing for the forum, people should come a little bit early, and you collect those. The moderator, who will be asking the questions, has an assistant. And prior to the forum starting, as these questions come forward, not only does the moderator and the assistant have the list of your questions already prepared, but they add to them as they get questions from the audience. Assuming they're not duped, obviously, they get rid of all the duplications and so forth, and try to add those in. And that's how it works. There's a moderator who asks the forum questions.
Okay, I have a question about the questions going to everybody. I would assume that the questions that are asked are not asked of an individual. Like, Susie, what do you think about this? It should be a question that's asked equally of everybody so they all have a chance. So it's not a targeted question to a person, but a question that everybody gets 30 seconds to answer, or?
However the committee decides to do it. I think Marshall mentioned at your next meeting, you're going to be talking about this. It'll be a closed session, and you will come up with your procedure.
How has that been done in the past? Does everybody, I mean, are there targeted questions to people, or are they generally?
It's been a bit of a mixed bag. Some are asked of everybody, depending on the nature of the question. Others are sort of randomized across the candidates. So not but the candidate, of course, can also say, well, I'd like to address that one if they aren't chosen.
What I'm thinking about is I don't really, love the idea that somebody would start attacking one person on one topic and pin them down and give them either the floor for a half hour or, feel like the arrows are all coming at them.
In the governing board election guide, it does state that the candidates, when they give their introductory remarks, which I believe is 5 minutes, that they are asked to include particulars such as why are you campaigning as to be a member of the governing board, for example. And then after that, we would have the questions, and we would just randomly choose a candidate to answer that question. And then their name would be set aside, and then a question would come up, and another name would be randomly drawn for them to answer that question. In some cases, I believe the audience was allowed to ask a specific question of a candidate, but I don't think it really happens that much. But again, that's something we can discuss next week. But there is a process that seems to work.
Okay, I'm asking that the next meeting, I think it's December 28th, that we have a closed session and hash this out and get your questions. We'll get them listed and we'll discuss that at that time. Okay. Any questions from the audience?
See, I told you he was listening.
Okay. Any other questions? Committee comments? Let me know if something comes up and you're concerned about it, well, let me know and we can.
I'd like to say that even with discussion, we stayed under an hour. Congratulations.
I can almost say that we'll probably always do that.